Access to Democracy is made possible thanks to the following organizations. Sheridan & Dulas, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm that has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009. Sheridan & Dulas are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Distillery was among the first 50 microdistilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at their facility. If you're interested in learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check their website and plan a visit to tour their facility and taste their spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. Thank you for joining us on this Minnesota winter day. It is a pleasure to welcome back to our studio, as always, our own legal eagle and our friend, Professor David Schultz from Hamline University and the University of Minnesota Law School, my alma mater. David, welcome back to Access to Democracy.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. We have so much to talk about, so we're going to jump right into it.
Good.
Everyone has been reading in the news and seeing on television the ICE raids, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, DHS raids that are occurring all over the country, high-profile events, many of them happening in Minnesota. There are growing concerns that we are hearing expressed by many people, including members of Congress, about issues relating to the Fourth Amendment, relating to probable cause of people being detained and arrested, warrantless searches and seizures occurring that seem to create problems in terms of the Fourth Amendment. How do you see these raids as they're unfolding? Are there problems with the legality of some of the raids that we are witnessing?
There are, but it's not just the Fourth Amendment. There's also First Amendment issues here. So let's start off by something really simple here, is that we have a First Amendment right to be on the streets. It's called freedom of association. We have a right to just be where we are. And with that, we have no law in this country that requires us to carry ID or carry proof of our citizenship. We are supposed to, in a free society, be allowed to what? Roam the streets free without feeling like we're...
And if we want to carry a sign protesting ICE
right.
or the government or the president or the Congress.
Right. That adds to another First Amendment protection called freedom of speech at this point. Do we have the right to hang out in front of a courthouse or a public street and say, I think ICE is all corrupt? We do. It's our constitutional right to say that. What's happening, though, is that ICE is engaging in racial profiling. We know that. And we know that in part because when that issue was raised a few months ago, the Supreme Court, and as part of its shadow docket, basically gave a pass. And so it's finding individuals who they think look like they don't belong in the United States.
We're talking about brown people,
right?
Latino, Hispanic people. People who look like they're out of place, as you say.
Exactly. And so what's happening, they're first engaging in racial profiling, stopping them, and then asking them a variety of questions. Now, do you have a constitutional right to basically tell a police officer, leave me alone? Yes, you do. However, there's a problem here because, I hate to use the phrase here, but ICE is acting like thugs. They're acting like thugs at this point in terms of going out, stopping people, and doing so without anything remotely called particularized suspicion. So under the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, the police just can't sort of come up to you and grab you. There's got to be some reason why. And so they're doing it based on just on race or racial profiling, and then hauling away people without any type of probable cause.
I want to read for folks. I think we talk about the Constitution and people think they have some understanding,
Right.
but I want to talk about this particular Fourth Amendment right now and read it. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath of affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Correct.
That is the essence of the Fourth Amendment, a bulwark against overreach by the government.
Right. The basic purpose of the Fourth Amendment, as all the entire Constitution and Bill of Rights, is what? The right to be left alone. It's the idea, growing out of our experiences with England, that we fear power, abuse of power, and that the government bears powerful burdens if it's going to stop and detain us. And as you're reading the Fourth Amendment here, it's first important to understand the government has to have probable cause, some reason to stop us. Actually, I'll back it. They have to have some suspicion reason. To arrest us eventually, they have to have probable cause. But merely because you have a certain color skin, merely because you've held up and you're exercising your constitutional rights, merely by the fact that you're on the street exercising your constitutional rights, which is just being on the streets here, does not constitute probable cause. They need something more to stop you,
right.
And then they need something more beyond that to actually arrest you. And in many cases, what they need is a warrant. Now, the other problem that we're seeing here is that it's not just that they're stopping people on public streets, which is bad enough, but ICE is now violating the Constitution in yet another way by entering private property or private establishments, walking around and arresting people. And it's also important to understand that if you have a private business, for example, or if you're a school, can you say to the ICE, stay out? Yes, you can. Can you demand a warrant? Yes, you can. But ICE is using, again, for lack of a better term, kind of a thug approach to trying to go about and do its job, and therefore intimidating and scaring people.
Well, it's like they're piggybacking and saying if you refuse to identify yourself or prove that you're in the country legally, that therefore they think they have probable cause to do what they're doing.
Yeah, they're basically sort of
piggybacking.
As piggybacking or backstrapping or whatever word you want to use in terms of being able to get into it.
Let's be clear too. We are not talking about people who may have an outstanding arrest warrant that was issued by a judge, where a judge has issued a warrant. Those people are subject to arrest once the police identify them, but they can't just throw a dragnet up and sweep up everyone there and require that they prove that they're innocent, right? Doesn't that turn, we have this whole presumption of innocence in American law, but what we see happening now is they're turning it into a situation where they're basically telling people that they're apprehending and detaining. You prove to me that you are in the country legally, not the other way around where the government has to actually prove that somebody has violated the law and is here in an undocumented status.
Absolutely correct. Some people might know the classic movie Casablanca. There's the famous lines where Claude Rains says, round up the usual suspects. You can't do that in a free society. You can't do that in the United States. That when it comes to constitutional rights, the burden is on the government to show always. That's the rule there.
And as you mentioned earlier, David, we don't have a national identity card. The authorities can't stop us on the streets and say, papers, please. We know regimes that did this in history, and in the not too distant history. This is what happened in the old Soviet Union, even in modern Russia, in Nazi Germany, in countries that slipped into authoritarianism and even totalitarianism.
That's right, because what they wind up doing is basically saying that you have no right to be out in public. You have no right to freely associate. And again, I'm not even sure if we passed a national ID law, like you were saying here, that it would withstand constitutional muster, because do I have a right to hang out on a street corner with a bunch of people? Yeah, that's called freedom of association. That's my right to just basically congregate on the streets for whatever reason. Now, clearly, if I'm breaking the law otherwise, that's different. But merely being on the street does not make me guilty of anything. Exercising my constitutional rights doesn't make me guilty of anything. Having skin color of a particular type does not make me a suspicious person.
We were told by the Trump administration, the president told us when he came back in, I am going after the worst of the worst. I am going after criminals, rapists, murderers, people who have clearly violated U.S. law, and moving to get rid of them. But what we're seeing in so many of these raids, that's not who they're rounding up at all. and rounding up people and sending them to countries which they have no connection to.
Yeah. I mean, first off, if his goal was to round up the worst of the worst, okay, but guess what? Show me the warrant.
Show me the warrant.
Show me the warrant. And even if there's a warrant, the Constitution says persons. All persons in the United States are entitled to due process, entitled to standing before a judge and to have the government prove why you should be, let us say, arrested, detained, deported, or something like that. Again, going back to the Claude Rains line, you just can't say round up the usual suspects.
And equal protection of the law, such a core concept to who we are as a people. Everyone is supposed to be equal before the law, regardless of where you were born, regardless of how you ended up in this country too, right?
Exactly.
The laws of the United States apply to everyone, regardless of your status in this country.
Right. The Constitution uses the word person 22 times. It doesn't use the word citizen. It doesn't say legal versus illegal or anything like that. If you are within the borders of the United States, you're subject to our laws, but that also means you are subject to our constitutional protections.
Do you think that these cases, there are obviously a number of lawsuits that have been filed recently, and these are going to work their way through the courts. Do you think ultimately that a good number of these plaintiffs are going to be vindicated?
Well,
will we see the courts stand up and defend individual liberty, or will they buckle to political pressure being applied by this administration?
It depends. What we're seeing right now in the first, 10 months or 11 months of the Trump administration, the lower federal courts are ruling against Trump at about 90% of the time. The U.S. Supreme Court is ruling in favor of Trump 90% of the time. The lower courts are doing their job. The problem is right now that this is Trump's court. 3 of those appointees are his, 6 of the 9 are Republican leaning. And that does not necessarily say that their Republicans are bad, but this is a group of people that are basically supporting the president all the time. And so that becomes the problem here, is that it's an interrelationship between the lower federal courts, which are doing their job, upholding rule of law, and the Supreme Court, which seems to be going out of its way to defer to President Trump.
And there are questions being raised now about the public's attitude toward our own U.S. Supreme Court because of this.
Exactly.
That I've seen some polling that suggests that the Supreme Court's popularity among the American public has fallen significantly in recent years because of some of the decisions they've issued.
Yeah, if we were to go back, let us say even a dozen years ago, we would see that presidential approval ratings were, let's say, the 40s or low 50s. Congress always abysmal, down like the 10 to 15%. But the court was always about 70 to 80%. Right. Since the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade, it is consistently under 50%. And I've seen some polling now that also suggests that the Supreme Court is in the, let us say, the 40% range at this point. Now, Congress would kill to have those ratings. The president would like to have that. But our whole faith in independent judiciary is based upon trust. It's based upon the idea of what? They are politically neutral. And they've lost.
And that they're making decisions based on the law,
that's right,
not on politics or political pressure.
Exactly. And unfortunately, what we would call the law school model, which is exactly that, they're making the decisions based upon law and facts, and the idea that the court is apolitical is increasingly giving away to my other profession, which is as a political scientist, where we describe the court as a political institution, where we can describe the justices as what? Politicians wearing robes who have policy preferences. And unfortunately right now, the political science models are a much better predictor of how the justices are going to vote than is what I call it, the law school model.
We should note, too, in this discussion, the Minnesota American Civil Liberties Union and several law firms have recently filed class action lawsuits. They are suing ICE and Department of Homeland Security, alleging unconstitutional mistreatment of bystanders protesting ICE actions. The suits allege peaceful bystanders have been pepper sprayed, had assault rifles pointed at them, and that U.S. citizens have been temporarily abducted and detained. It's almost like inconceivable to us that something like this could be happening in our country today.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, do individuals have a right to photograph or videotape police or ICE doing their job? Unequivocally, they do. Police don't like it, ICE doesn't like it, but you have that constitutional right to do so.
I want to ask you this, David. Are federal agents, sounds like you've given us the answer, but I want to hone in on your response to this. Are federal agents potentially violating state laws, and should local and state police be moving to arrest ICE or DHS agents if they are violating state law?
Well, they may be violating the laws, but they can't be arrested. And they can't be arrested because of this thing called the Supremacy Clause that basically says that the federal law at all shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, what should be, this is an important thing, 'cause I've heard lots of people say this. Why can't the police, local police arrest them?
Right.
They don't have jurisdiction over them. They can't do that. They don't have that authority to do it.
So is the only remedy then a civil remedy against federal agents,
Exactly.
law enforcement agents who violate someone's constitutional rights?
Right. And the way I described it, and I described this recently with an interview with Esme Murphy. And she said, well, what's the remedy? And I said, well, you could do one at a time, which is very complicated. One person suing at a time. I said, however, there are two alternative remedies here. One is to also bring a class action suit on behalf of everybody who are being similarly detained. And even though the U.S. Supreme Court said earlier this year that nationwide injunctions, universal injunctions, violate the Constitution, however, if judges in Minnesota, in District Court Minnesota, issued an injunction applying only to the state of Minnesota, they could do that. So class actions are still possible, as well as what? Well, I'll call it injunctions within the state of Minnesota. Now, each state could do it also too.
Right.
But here you could get a lawsuit. Again, also brought by the ACLU, and I certainly hope my friends at the ACLU, of which I used to be a vice president for 2 chapters, I hope they hear that and not just sue on behalf of bystanders, but on behalf of the people being detained, and do class action or injunctions.
And so people should understand you may have federal remedies available to you for violations of your rights, but you definitely have state remedies available to you.
You have these are remedies under federal law. You can't arrest. State officials can't
No,
arrest.
not arrest, but could there be a basis for state lawsuits against? There cannot be because of the Supremacy Clause.
Supremacy Clause. For anybody who's ever gone to law school, this is McCullough versus Maryland. That states cannot do things that impinge upon federal authority generally.
Yeah.
Now, can states decide not to cooperate? Yes, they can. Can they hinder? No. But under no circumstances can the feds force states, because there was a case. It was called National Federation of Small Businesses versus Sebelius, which is about the constitutionality of Obamacare. And what Obamacare wanted to do was to create real strong incentives and penalties if states didn't expand their Medicaid. And what the Supreme Court said is that under the principle of federalism, you cannot coerce states. And I would argue that a lot of what Trump is trying to do right now, coerce states either through funding or other mechanisms, and that's also unconstitutional in violation of what? The 10th Amendment.
I want to ask you about something else. We are seeing again in the news every day reports of the latest strikes by U.S. military forces against alleged drug traffickers in boats on the high seas in international waters. Minimal consultation with Congress, the president not seeking a declaration of war from the Congress or even authorization to engage the military in this. Do you believe that these ongoing attacks on the high seas are legal? And if they are not, is it theoretically possible that the U.S. is committing war crimes on the high seas?
Well, we've got two different senses of illegality potentially here. We'll do domestically first. Is the president potentially violating the War Powers Act? Yes. Is the president potentially intruding upon Article 1 constitutional authority of Congress to declare war and for its control of the military? Yes. No question there. Internationally, This is actually interesting you asked this question here, because I just finished up my semester teaching. Among the classes I teach is international law. And there's several different things going on here. First, in general, boats on the sea, especially fishing boats, going back to the 19th century, are not subject to being attacked under rules of war. That's a problem. Second, going after those boats might be piracy. Third, it might form under international law. Third, it might be a form of aggression, a violation of international law. Additionally, depending on if the U.S. government is specifically targeting people based upon their, let's say, ethnicity, it also might violate the Treaty on Genocide. So there's a variety of possibilities here, all which would make it possible in some cases to bring the case against in the International Court of Justice. However, the United States, going back to the Reagan era, when the Reagan administration did not want to be brought before the International Court of Justice for its illegal mining and attacks on Nicaragua, more or less has said
During the war against the Contras.
we will
conflict.
pick and choose when the International Court of Justice will hear our cases. But yes, there are many international laws that the U.S. is potentially violating right now, along with domestic laws.
One of the problems, it seems to me, is that the government continues to allege these are narco traffickers. They are running illegal drugs. We've not seen anyone apprehended and brought before a U.S. court to prove that allegation. Right. We've not actually seen the recovery of any alleged drugs from these boats. We just blow them up.
Right.
And in at least one instance, there were 2 survivors of one of the attacks who were repatriated to their country. You would think if we were in a conflict with them and they had violated law, why wouldn't we have apprehended them on the high sea and brought them into the jurisdiction of a U.S. court?
Great question.
But number 2, we have an instance recently too where there was an attack and apparently everybody except 2 people were killed on a boat, and then we allegedly went back for the kill strike to eliminate those 2 people as well. This one is causing a lot of consternation and has triggered a tremendous amount of questions from members of Congress who want to know what is going on here, because that's potentially a violation of the laws of war too.
Right. So either it's a violation of the laws of war, and it's a mistreatment of potentially prisoners of war, which violates several Geneva Conventions. Or alternatively, if we think they are drug dealers, we should have what? We should have gathered them up, put them on the boat, charged them, and brought them before a judge for a hearing.
And we didn't do that.
We didn't do either of them.
Yep.
So in either case, there's a problem.
I want to switch subjects. Boy, the time always goes so fast with you, David. Birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
I want to read the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Notice it doesn't say anything about how you got here, the circumstances of your birth, where your parents came from. But the Trump administration has convinced the Supreme Court to hear arguments in a case that could result in overturning the understanding of this provision of the Constitution, which has been in place for 160 years.
Correct.
One of the post-Civil War amendments adopted, I think 1868.
1868, and it was adopted to overturn one of the most notorious and worst decisions in Supreme Court history, Dred Scott versus Sanford.
Which held that he was not a citizen. He was property, so he therefore could not be a citizen.
Right, he was a slave, right, and they ruled
him
slave. Yeah, you're right. And the Supreme Court has at least in 1 or 2 other occasions interpreted this clause and said the words mean what they mean. If you're born here, it doesn't matter under what circumstances, you are a U.S. citizen.
There are many provisions of our Constitution, and you've studied it, and I have too, that there is room for interpretation. This seems about as straightforward a provision from our Constitution as one could imagine. Do you really think it's possible that this Supreme Court could upend 160 years of our understanding of what the law is about? Who is a U.S. citizen?
I would hope not, but this is a court that is so hostile to precedent, so hostile to constitutional precedent, that I could see a scenario where it would do that. It would contort itself, and it would say that, well, this precedent was wrong, it creates a problem because the language is so clear. And this is a court that also says we start with plain text of the language.
Right.
I don't
Many
know
of them call themselves strict constructionists.
That's right. I don't know how you do it, except go back to what I said before. If the legal model is correct, they'll never do it. If the political science model is correct, they're going to do it.
Wow. And just think of the problems. I'm just thinking of what some of the problems that could be created if they overturned this understanding. So would that mean that the parents were in the country undocumented, therefore the child born here is no longer considered a citizen? Can they be deported?
Well, that's a great question here. How do you basically revoke
if you're not a citizen?
Yeah, how do you revoke citizenship to millions of people? It's like the concern that people had a few weeks ago that the court was going to reconsider the issue of gay marriage. And the court basically said, no, we're not going to reconsider. Well, if it did, I don't know how many couples you have in America who are of the same sex, but you have a practical issue out here. And I would argue, in a very interesting way, that one of the problems with this court is not that it's too political, it's just that it's completely oblivious to politics and the consequences of its decisions. And I think the good courts, as Stephen Breyer said in his book, former Supreme Court Justice, he said, the court has to be pragmatic. It has to think about the implications of what it's saying and what it's doing. And this is a court that's proverbially what the bull in the china shop, that just, boom, goes ahead without thinking about the repercussions of what it's doing.
We have enough time for me to ask you about one more case, and this may seem a little bit esoteric to some people. The Trump administration is asking the court to overturn something called a precedent called Humphrey's Executor. This is the case of Trump versus Slaughter. It's a 90-year-old precedent that limits the president's authority to remove officials of independent agencies. The quick background here is that Trump recently this year fired FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter, who he appointed to the FTC in his first term. She served through the Biden administration, and then Trump decided earlier this year that he was going to terminate her. But she works for the Federal Trade Commission, an independent agency. Is this a power grab again by the executive? And what do you think the court will do with this?
It is a power grab again. And the Supreme Court is probably going to overturn Humphrey's executor in the process here. It's using the theory, what's called the unified or unitary executive, to say that the president embodies all the power in the executive branch. It ignores the fact that what? Congress has, through its power of appropriation and legislation, the ability to be able to what? Create departments and agencies.
They created the FTC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And can they attach strings to it? Of course they should be able to. And prior Supreme Courts, such as Humphrey executor case, have reaffirmed that principle.
Wow. There is so much happening in our courts, it's really hard to keep up with. What particular case are you watching right now and waiting for an outcome, case that's been heard or is pending before the U.S. Supreme Court?
It's the tariff case. The case on tariffs, something that hits close to home to everybody. The fact that all of us are seeing what? The price of milk, bread, eggs, gasoline go up.
Soybean farmers losing their market, $1 billion worth of sales to China.
Exactly. And it's that case. That's going to be the case that shows us whether or not the Supreme Court has any backbone. Because everybody who's looked at that case, looked at what the law was there, says the president is misusing that law and does not have the authority to unilaterally impose these tariffs. We're going to see what the court says in that. That's the one that's a big one for me.
And again, they'll be out with their final opinions of the term will come out before June next year, right?
We presume.
We hope, yeah. Professor David Schultz of the Hamline University and the University of Minnesota Law School, thank you once again for being our guest on Access to Democracy and helping us unravel some of these really complex legal issues that we find ourselves facing today. Thank you.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.